Welcome back to our final lesson in setting up materials and lighting for the golf cart. In this lesson, we're going to be setting up the materials and light source for the headlight, which can be applied to the tail light, just changing the color to red, as well as a turntable for our main camera. So when we render out our scene, we will have a nice animation of the cart turning around in a 360 rotation. In our last lesson, we set up a light rig with a key light, rim light, and down here is our fill light, as well as our main camera. And in that previous lesson, or perhaps a couple before that, I think I had you set up a ground plane with use background shader material right here. And for this lesson, because we're going to be applying the headlight needs to really sort of illuminate on that ground plane the way headlights do, and that will not work with use background shader. So let's go ahead and swap that out just under this tab right here. It says type, and we can just change that over to a Phong. That way we don't lose our nice reflection we have of our cart into the ground plane, but we will be able to see our lighting materials hitting onto the ground plane. You can go ahead and darken the color up a little bit if you like. This is sort of the middle gray. I'm going to darken it down just a little bit. That way our lights will show up more, as well as the fog light that we're going to attach to our headlight. And let's go ahead and change our background color as well. This is under the attributes for the camera. Under, let's go ahead and actually select our camera that we're rendering with, the attributes for that, and scroll down to environment. And here we selected sort of a middle gray matching our ground. And we can do something a bit darker, like that, maybe 0.05. It might be a little dark, but I think that's enough light source that Final Gather is still going to work for us. Final Gather is going to be playing off of the light actually hitting on the surface of the ground plane now. That's going to have a much greater effect for the Final Gather. So now that we have that selected, actually let me set up my camera. I'm going to zoom in a little bit just so we can see how our headlight is working. And I'm going to come back to our perspective camera so I can set up the materials. So just zooming in here on the headlight, I'm going to set up one headlight, and then you can go ahead and apply that over to the other headlight as well as the tail lights. So the first material I'm selecting is what's going to be the clear or transparent glass. This is separate from, if I select 4 on my keyboard, that is separate from the back part of the sphere, which we sort of created into that dome shape or egg shape geometry. So these are separate pieces. We're going to have separate materials on them. That was sort of the purpose of dividing that up. And coming back to 6, let's go ahead and assign a new material to that. Selecting a blend, I'm going to change the color to something sort of bright, a little warm, like that. Increasing the transparency to about halfway and bringing up the ambient as well as the incandescence. This will give it sort of a nice glow. And I'm going to attach a bump map to this. This is just going to break up the surface. It's not really going to apply a 3D bump map that looks like halogen light or anything. We'd actually have to make a texture for that in Photoshop and apply it, much like how we did the wheel. But this is just more serving the purpose of breaking up the texture or the light source coming through here using a grid. I'm going to decrease the bump amount to 0.5, so half the amount, and under the grid, just change that a little bit, maybe to 0.2 and 0.3. That should work nicely. And now moving on to the chrome piece. Around here, let's apply the existing material, the MIA chrome. to that. Selecting 4 on the keyboard, I'm going to come in here and grab that inside dome. And before we apply the material on that, we probably work a little bit better if we reverse the normals on it, because we are applying the material to the inside. So let's just say normals reverse, and then go ahead and apply that same MIA material chrome. And now selecting the sphere, which sort of represents our lamp, the light itself. This is going to have the most glow material on it. So let's go ahead and apply a new material, selecting blend. And I haven't been renaming these. We'll just call this lamp blend. And selecting that same color, making it a little bit transparent, not much, and then bringing up the ambient as well as the incandescence a bit more than what we had on the headlight cover itself. And just scrolling down under specular shading, I'm going to take reflectivity off on it completely. Reflectivity takes a little bit of render time, so if you don't actually need it, you should shut it off. And under special effects, this is our glow intensity, and I'm going to set that to 0.3. And that should work nicely for that. Let's come back out over here. I have 6 on the keyboard. You can see the materials on there now. And selecting 7 brings up our lights. And I'm going to kind of zoom in here for our render just so we see it actually working. Let's go ahead and render that. You can see it's taking a little bit of time to calculate all of that. And we're seeing the materials first. The transparency and the glow actually comes in right at the very end of the render. See it moving across here, and it should pop in. There it is. So now that we have our materials set up, let's go ahead and create a spotlight. We're going to place this inside, or the cone actually coming out of the light itself. We hit 4, there it is in the center there. And we have been coming under panels and saying look through selected camera, which is sort of the most efficient way for setting lights up in a scene when they're lighting an object. But since we're actually going to place this sort of inside this headlight, a little bit easier way is to either come over here and click on the Show Manipulator tool, or that's also T on the keyboard. So you get 2 manipulators now, one that controls the actual light itself, or the light camera, and then this manipulator will affect where it is pointing. So we can turn it around by grabbing that and sort of placing the actual light inside here. I'm going to go back to 5, and it looks pretty good there, kind of coming right out of the center. And we're pointing down onto our ground plane. So we're going to see this kind of illuminate the ground plane. And let's go ahead and set up the attributes for that. The color is going to be that same warm color we're using. Leaving the intensity at 1. I'm going to take the cone angle down to about half the amount, let's say 20. Penumbra of 10 and a drop off of 1. And scrolling down under light effects, that's the next tab. This is where our light fog is at. So all we have to do is just click on here. It activates it. We now have fog attached to that. I'm going to leave the density at 1. So just clicking over here back onto our light itself. This sort of represents that fog now that we attached, that light fog. So the spread and the intensity are what sort of affect the look of it and the quality. They work hand in hand. So if we say bring this up to 1.5 and maybe the fog intensity to 2, we should definitely see that glowing now. So let's go ahead and set that up and bring up our render window and render that. So we can see both the fog light and the light hitting the ground plane here, which is what we were after. And the glow should come on here momentarily as it finishes up rendering. And there it is. So this is sort of subtle. I'm probably going to leave mine like that. If you want to bump up the intensity, you can do that. It's sort of a fine balance between the color of your ground plane as well as the background color you've chosen for the environment. I'm actually going to darken my environment down here so that will have a little bit of effect on this, and I think that's good. So go ahead and apply all of that now to the other headlight, and apply the materials the same way to the taillights, using red for the glass piece as well as what's illuminated on the inside here. The lamp inside should be red as well, and that should give you some nice taillights. You don't need a light coming out the back, obviously. And let's move on to setting up the turntable. And now that we have our scene completely set up now with all of our materials and lighting, we're going to set up a turntable. This is actually quite simple to do. The first thing we're going to set up is the number of frames that we're going to render out. Right now we're set up here for 48. Let's go ahead and take that up to 3 seconds, so 72. And we need to actually extend our scroll bar. So grabbing the end of that and dragging it to the end. So we're going from 1 to 72. And now coming under Create, we're going to say NURBS, making sure the interactive creation is turned off. We're going to select Circle. And there it is. If I hit 4 on the keyboard. Right there. And we're going to scale that up now, just selecting R. I'm going to scale it up to about the distance my camera is, so sort of looking down here, this is my main camera. And I'm going to set it up about there. That should be about right. And I'm going to move it up into position now. So lifting it off the ground plane, it should almost be intersecting my camera. It looks like it is. And with that selected, I'm going to shift select my camera. Come under Animation, and I'm going to say Animate, Motion Paths, and Attach to Motion Paths. So we are attaching that camera to that circle. And it defaulted over here. If we want to set it up, this is where the start and end position are going to be. If we want the start position to be sort of back where it was before, we can go ahead and rotate that into place. I had it about there, 3/4 view. All right. And that's really all there is to setting up a turntable. And the next thing we do is come under Rendering, Render, and say Batch Render. You can go ahead and open this up. These are sort of the default settings here. And if you haven't already done so, everything should be set up here in your render settings with Mental Ray. Under Common, make sure you have, you can either use JPEGs, that's probably the most desirable thing to render with, and as well as setting an extension with single frame, something other than single frames, so it will start numbering. I'm going to say name.number and then the extension after that, and the start frame is 0, the end frame is 72. Make sure that's all plugged in there, and just double checking that our quality is set up to sure it's on production. And we're going to say, let's go ahead and use the Mitchell filter. It's a little bit finer quality filter. Turning jitter on, and under indirect lighting, making sure we have final gather selected. Just very quickly, let's save the scene and go ahead and say batch render. And you can see right here that it's starting to render with Mental Ray. You can open up this window and it will actually start to show you what's going on here, telling you how long each frame is taking. And it's probably a good time to go get a cup of coffee and come back and check your renders.